more on the impact on emerging markets, we're joined now by Daniel Tenengauzer. He's the head of emerging market currency and rate strategy at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Thank you, Dan, for joining us. The past 2 weeks, the behavior of the emerging markets because of Egypt, what does that tell you?
I think overall the picture is still very benign for emerging markets, and one of the things that is happening in Egypt is that the population wants a bigger share of this growth story. That really is the bottom line, is that you got as a policymaker to share the growth and the positive momentum.
But you've been frightened away because of all this political risk, though.
Exactly. So one of the issues is, in the meantime, given that investors don't understand what the transition would look like, they would like to pull their money out because those are the assets that did so well over the past couple of years.
You know, one of the other things is investors immediately said, geez, what is my exposure to Egypt if I've been buying exchange-traded funds that are tied to emerging markets? And it gets to a bigger question. You know, if you look at the MSCI Emerging Markets ETF, which is kind of like the S&P for the rest of the emerging markets, most of that is tied to banks and mining companies, as opposed to the S&P, which is mainly a bet right now on the technology sector. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, Egypt is interesting because actually, as a country, the shares are very small, right? So it's not a big story. Investors don't have a whole lot of exposure to it. Where they do have is there a large share of the, interestingly enough, the local bond market. About a third of the local bond market is actually owned by foreigners, and that really is where the risk is coming from. If they decide to take that exposure off the table, the pound could actually weaken quite a bit.
You know, the Egypt story was a little bit of a surprise to the markets. I don't think people were expecting this to happen. But the China overheating story has been one of those themes that's been in the background. What's your take on that?
Well, there are a couple of things. First, they hiked last week, which was, I think, a good thing. Before the new year started, they decided to impose that interest rate hike. Point number two is that inflation is coming lower. So they are acting, and things are actually moving.
You're sure about that? Inflation's going lower?
Well, the headline dropped from January to February. So, yes, I mean, it's, you know, that's where it is. And overnight there was talk that they might actually reduce the share of food in the inflation basket, which is actually something they should do, because as a country grows, food becomes a smaller portion of the food basket.